Okay, thank you very much. All right, so let me pull up our screen. Let's see, share screen. I'm going to start on page 30. And we're talking about ninth of Av, and that's what this uh, last last daf is all about. Is uh, the ninth of Av and practices on that day. So it says here in the Mishnah, which we read a few weeks ago, Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam shnei tavshilin. On Tisha B'Av, a person may not eat two cooked dishes in one meal. So this is the meal right before. It's a little bit like, before Yom Kippur, we you have this final meal, this Sudah Mafseket, although in this case, it's a little bit different. The Sudah Mafseket on Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur, you're supposed to eat a full meal. Here, it's pretty clear that because it's connected to mourning, we're eating less. We're not supposed to eat a full meal. In fact, in this case, we're not allowed to eat two cooked dishes. So it mostly, I guess, would be raw foods. And Rav Yehuda said, in explaining the Mishnah, they taught that one may not partake of a meal with two dishes only from 6 hours of the day and onward. And that's, again, remember, 6 relative hours. So it's basically midday. But from 6 hours and earlier, it is permitted. So in the morning, which is, and I think at the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, basically people had 2 meals a day. You had a big meal in the or maybe in the morning when you started, and then a big meal during the early afternoon, and that's why 3 meals on Shabbat was such a big deal. It was a very big celebration. So if you're only having 2 meals, so the first meal of the day, you could have these 2 cooked dishes, according to Rav Yehuda, but after midday, then you only have 1. However, in a non-concluding meal, it is permitted to eat 2 cooked dishes. So, wait, did I get? Oh no, here Rav Yehuda also said. Sorry, missed the second half. They taught that it is prohibited to eat 2 dishes only in a concluding meal before beginning the fast. However, in a non-concluding meal, it's permitted to eat 2 cooked dishes. So, on the one hand, these 2 statements can stand with each other, right? A non-concluding meal would be in the morning, probably, and the concluding meal would be sometime late afternoon. However, I suppose you could also, I don't know, if you're a hungry person, you're eating you wake up, you're eating late breakfast, you're like, what were the Hobbit books? It's a second breakfast or something, and then you have an early, then you eat lunch, and then so your concluding meal, if it's just the concluding meal, it's possible if you're a person who eats a number of times during the day, that we're really just talking about the meal right before the observance begins. So it could be contradictory as well. V'tarvaihu lekula. So it says both of these teachings, though, are intended actually to be leniencies, utzricha, and they're both necessary. And why are they necessary? Hava amina afilu misheshaot ulamata. So you had to say these 2 statements. The reason why he included both of them was because had he taught us that this halacha is referring only to the concluding meal, I would have said that this applies even from 6 hours and earlier. Right? If maybe you're a person who only eats 1 meal a day or 1 big meal at 11 o'clock, right before noon. Well, if that's the concluding meal, then you're not allowed to have 2 cooked meals. So therefore, he teaches us that it applies only from 6 hours and onward. And had he taught us only that it's prohibited to eat 2 dishes from 6 hours and onward, I would have said that this applies even to a meal which he does not stop eating. So and therefore he teaches us that it applies only to the concluding meal. So you could have a situation where the person started eating at 11, and if we thought that this was a concluding meal, then wait, this one is 6 hours and onward. I would have said even applies to a meal which he does not stop eating. So even in the case, wait a minute, now had he only had from 6 hours and onward, then then even if it's not the concluding meal, you would have to stop.
Well, wouldn't this, it struck me this remark applies to the case where he sits down and starts eating at 11.
Right, and then he keeps on
still eating at noon.
Right. So yes, that could be it too. So that and then, well, right, and in that case, it's not the concluding meal because it's earlier, but he's past that time zone.
Right, exactly.
And so, yeah, so that would be, so then you would have assumed in that case, oh, he would have had to stop eating at 12 o'clock, or he would have had to stop eating the at least the 2 cooked dishes. He would have had to put them aside. And he says, no, that's only in the case where this is the absolute last meal of the day. So then the Gemara, it's very interesting. The Gemara tells us that, by the way, you've got 2 baraitas that teach exactly what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. So we have this baraita. It is taught in a baraita. Let's see. Hasoed erev Tisha B'Av. A person is eating his meal on the eve of Tisha B'Av. If he's going to eat another meal, mutar lechol basar velishtot yayin. So here it's not talking about the 2. Oh, hey Ezekiel. Here it's not talking about 2 cooked meals. Here we're talking about 2 different types of food, which are usually considered inappropriate at a time of sadness, because meat and wine represent joyfulness. So here the teaching is hasoed erev. Okay, so if he's going to eat another meal, it's not the last meal, it's not the concluding meal of the day. He's permitted to have at this earlier meal meat and drink wine. Im lav asur lechol basar v'lishtot yayin. If it's not his last meal, I mean, if there isn't another meal coming, if this is the last meal, then you do not eat meat or drink wine. Then we have another. We have another baraita. On the eve of the 9th of Av, a person may not eat 2 cooked dishes. Furthermore, one may neither eat meat nor drink wine. So here's meat and wine again. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Omer yishaneh. How do you adjust the meal? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ketzad mishaneh. Im haya ragil le'achol shnei tavshilim. If it's your regular custom to eat 2 cooked meals at a meal, 2 cooked dishes at a meal, yochal min echad. You cut back. You only eat 1. Im haya ragil lis'od ba'asara b'nei adam. If you have communal meals with a lot of people, so eid b'chamisha. Just eat with 5 people. So make it a smaller group. Haya ragil lishtot asara kosot. Okay, if you were accustomed to drink 10 cups of wine, I'm assuming, shoteh chamisha kosot. Even chamisha kosot, you could have problems. But med barim amorim. What are we talking about? What's the case here?
How big the cup and how strong is the wine?
Yeah, right. Well, yes, obviously people were used to it. And well, you know what they used to do, I think, is with wine. And this is why the term is limzog, to mix. When the term to pour wine in at least in rabbinic Hebrew is limzog, which is to mix, because they would have the really concentrated wine, and then you would pour a little bit and pour water in with it. So you would actually, when you're drinking wine, you're mixing the wine with, you're diluting the intense wine. So yeah, so it's possible maybe it wasn't as strong as what we would be drinking. or maybe they were used to it. You know, they didn't. It was like water was probably more dangerous than fermented grapes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So,
I think
um,
the famous passage from St. Paul where he's advising some aged colleague to take a little wine with his water.
oh. Okay, so when is this? What's the case we're dealing with? Mishesha ot ulamala. So this is from 6 hours and onward, the afternoon. Aval mishesha ot ulamata mutar. So if you're if we're talking about the morning meal, the first part of the day, again, it's not a problem to eat 2 cooked dishes and to eat with your large communal group, or drink your 10 cups of wine, or eat meat. But in the afternoon, we stop that. So as we're getting closer to Tisha B'Av, we want to pull back and recognize that the sadness of the day is coming on us. So it actually, what it's saying is that the beginning of the feeling that we're supposed to have on Tisha B'Av begins earlier than Tisha B'Av. It begins already at the end of Erev Tisha B'Av. And then we have another bright, Tanya Idach, Erev Tisha B'Av, lo yochal adam shnei tavshilin. Okay, Erev Tisha B'Av, you don't eat 2 cooked dishes. Lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yayin. You don't drink meat. You don't eat meat. You don't drink wine. This is according to Rabbi Meir. Hachamim omrim, but the majority of the sages, yishaneh umima'et babasar uvayayin. So the opinion of the majority of the sages was, no, you modify, lessen the amount of meat and wine you're drinking. Kate Sad Mima'et, how do you do that? Im haya ragil le'echol litra basar, if you were accustomed to eating a litra of some large amount of meat. Yochal chatzi litra. So eat half of it. Haya ragil lishtot log yayin. Here's a log of yayin, and again I forget how that translates to us. But a certain amount, a large amount of wine. Well, you would then yishteh chatzi log, eat and drink half of it. Ve'ime no ragil kol ikar asur. But if you're not accustomed at all to doing these things, maybe meat was hard to come by. I don't know what about wine, but certainly with meat. And if you weren't used to doing that, well, then you shouldn't eat those things at all. You shouldn't start eating meat the day before Tisha B'Av. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, imaya ragil le'echol tzinon o maliach achar seudato. So this was a custom, I guess, some people had of eating a radish. That was like their dessert, I guess, or something salty after the meal. Haroshut biyado. You can do that, probably because he says that it's not considered an additional dish. I think it's also, though, it makes it more uncomfortable to fast. I don't know about a radish so much. Maybe if it's a very sharp taste, but certainly a salted dish you would want to drink a lot. And here, in some ways, it's similar to that Yom Kippur where you're supposed to have a full meal. It's much harder to fast, I think, on a full meal, on a full stomach, than if you're on just a little bit of food. So here, it's kind of the same idea. If you're eating something sharp or eating something salty, it's okay to do that because it's only going to make your fast harder. That's what I think. But he says it's just not considered additional dish once you've concluded your main meal. All right, Tanya Idach, we got another brayta. Kol shehu mishum Tisha B'Av, asur le'echol basar v'asur l'shtot yayin v'asur l'rchotz. On Tisha B'Av itself, it's forbidden to eat meat, forbidden to drink wine, and forbidden to bathe. He says it's any meal that is eaten due to the fast. Oh, kol shehu mishum. Anything that's anything that's related to the fast. In any way, any preparations, maybe is what I would say. Kol shehu mishum. Anything that you're doing to prepare for this Tisha B'Av, you forbid yourself to eat meat, drink wine, and wash. That doesn't make sense either. don't know why he says in any meal that is eaten due. Oh, of course, that makes sense. Of course, you're forbidden to eat meat. That's the point. Okay, or drink wine. So this would contradict what we just saw up here. Okay, and you're not supposed to bathe the day before. Kol she'eino mishum Tisha B'Av, mutar lechol basar v'lishtot yain v'asur lirchotz. In a meal that's not due to Tisha B'Av, one is eating the meal in order that he shouldn't be hungry on the 9th of Av. It's permitted to eat meat, to drink wine, but it's nevertheless prohibited. Did I read that right? Mutar lechol basar lishtot. Oh, and asur lirchotz, right? But it's forbidden to bathe. So here, I think what we're seeing is, again, a confirmation of what we read up here. If you're eating, so this is really interesting. So there's preparation to get in the mood of Tisha B'Av I'm guessing, Erev Tisha B'Av, maybe even before Erev Tisha B'Av. And there are things we've seen already, like that early morning meal on Erev Tisha B'Av, that you're eating, which is not in the spirit of getting ready for Tisha B'Av. And so here it says, in a sense, it's kind of giving us an explanation. Why are we making all these changes to eat in certain, or to limit ourselves in certain ways with food and drink, and in this case, bathing as well? Well, it's because we're in the mood. We're trying to put ourselves in the mood for Tisha B'Av. And so if you are eating for that purpose, because it's the meal right before, then we're limiting what we're eating. We're not eating meat, we're not drinking wine, and we're not bathing. The second half, though, says if you're eating, but it's not, maybe it's earlier in the day, that early morning meal, or maybe suppose you could even carry it out to the day before. You're not focusing on Tisha B'Av, you're not getting into the mood with that meal, then you can continue your regular, you can eat meat, you can drink wine, but you're still forbidden to bathe. And in fact, I think the custom to this day that prevails, which is a little different from what we saw last week in the Talmud, is that from the 1st of Av through the 9th of Av, one does not bathe. So there are people who won't bathe the whole week and a half. It's not just a few days before Tisha B'Av, which is what we saw last week in the Gemara. So yeah, so in this case, yes, you can eat meat, you can drink wine earlier if you're not preparing for the day to get in that mood, but you still don't bathe. Okay, now Rabbi Yishmael, but Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv, and so this is Rabbi Yishmael said in the name of his father, Rabbi Yossi, Kol sha'a shemutar le'achol basar mutar le'chotz. So he's saying they go together. If you can eat meat, yeah, you can take a bath in the morning, or shower in the morning, or but when you can't eat meat, then you don't shower. They're all connected. Tanu Rabbanan, Kol mitzvot hanohagot ba'avel nohagot b'tisha b'av. All of the mitzvot that are connected to avelut, mourning, are customary on Tisha B'Av. So that's the state we're supposed to be in, a state of mourning. Asur ba'achila u'v'shtiya u'v'sicha u'v'ni'ilat sandal u'v'tashmish amita. Ve'asur likrot b'Torah b'nevi'im u'v'ktuvim u'lishnot mishnah b'talmud u'v'midrash u'v'halachot v'agadot. Okay, so so the only change is obviously you can eat and drink if you're in mourning, but here it says on Tisha B'Av we don't eat, we don't drink, we do not do anointing or smearing oil. That's the sicha. This is like Yom Kippur. These are all the customs of Yom Kippur. We don't wear. Literally here, we don't wear shoes. We don't wear sandals. Our custom today is not to wear leather shoes. Uva tashmi shamita, no sexual relations. But in addition, we also, because of when we're mourning, we don't study Torah. Torah is something that's pleasurable. That's what I said a couple weeks ago on Tisha B'Av when we had our class. I said, I'm going to subvert this halacha because I want to get done. So we did study, but in general, no, you're not. One of the things you're forbidden from doing on Tisha B'Av is studying Torah. And here are all the things you can study. It's Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, Agadot, Halacha, and Agadot. So Midrash and Agadot here, I think, are distinguished because usually sometimes they're considered to be the same thing, but Agadot would be more like stories of sages, story type explanations of things, and Midrash is more the interpretation of biblical verses. Okay, so aval, but there are certain things we can study. Aval korehu b'makom she'eno ragil likrot. You can study a place in Torah that you're not used to studying. V'shoneh b'makom she'eno ragil lishnot. And you can learn something you're not accustomed to. Interesting. V'koreh b'kinot, and you can read Lamentations, lamentation poems. You can read Eov, the book of Job. Devarim haraim sheb'Yirmiyahu, and the more disturbing parts, the evil matters in Jeremiah, about the destruction. V'tinokot shel beit rabban b'telin, the kids don't go to school. Mishum shenemar pkudei Adonai yisharim misamchei lev, because all of this is because the precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. All of this stuff makes us rejoice when you study Torah. But in this case, the Baraita here says, this is so interesting. It's just an interesting insight. But things you're not used to studying, like I never looked at the Book of Chronicles, and you start studying Chronicles, like, this is really hard. I don't really know what this means. What is it talking about? Or you pick up something in the Talmud or a Midrash that you've never studied before, and it's really hard, and you're cracking your teeth on it. So then it's not so pleasurable because it's hard. It's irritating. Believe me, I know this. When I'm preparing something and I start studying a Midrash, I'm like, what is going on? I don't understand this. Where's my English translation? So it's not so pleasurable. It gives you a headache. But here's the interesting response. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af eino koreh b'makom she'eino ragil likrot ve'eino shoneh b'makom she'eino ragil lishnot. He says, no, you're not even allowed to study those things that you're not used to. And I think the difference here is his sense that for many people who love to study Torah, that's the stuff they like, is when you come to something you don't understand and you got to puzzle it out. I mean, it's that's the joy of Talmud, and not just reviewing stuff you already know, but actually going through stuff that's really hard, cracking your teeth on it, sitting there for an hour going through the dictionary. What does that word mean? What does that word mean? But that's part of the joy of studying Torah. So it's a very interesting way of looking at what it means to learn and what causes joyfulness in learning. Is it stuff you've never learned before, because that's the fun of learning, is really being patient and going through it over and over again? Or is that does that make it really hard and dray your cup and make you have a headache? And so it's not so pleasurable. So interesting understanding of what it means of how learning rejoices the heart. Because everything else Rabbi Yehuda agrees with. You can study Job, you can study Lamentations, you can study the parts of Jeremiah that talk about the destruction, and the school children don't study on that day either. Okay, so now we're getting to the next part of the Mishnah. Lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yayin. Okay, we've looked at this a little bit. We've already heard this in some baraitas. Tana, aval ochelhu basar maliach v'shoteh yayin migito. So according to this baraita, there are certain exceptions to not eating meat or drinking wine. You can eat salted meat, right? Because it's going to make you want to drink a lot and so it's going to be harder for you to fast. V'shoteh yayin migito. You can drink wine from the press. It hasn't fermented yet. And so it's really not what you would call wine. I don't know if it means it tastes like grape juice, but basar maliach ad kama, amar Rav Chinana bar Kahana mishmei dishmuel. So Rav Chinana says in the name of Shmuel, kol zman shehu kishlamim. So this is kind of interesting. what it means. What does it mean that salted meat? How long does the meat have to be salted for it to be to get to this state where I guess it's very salty and not as pleasurable to eat? And they say as long as it is like peace offering. So shlamim, which is what they're translating peace offerings here, but it's really better translated as whole wellness offerings, because these were voluntary offerings that were made by the individual Jew for all types of reasons. And you would definitely eat the meat that you brought. The priest gets certain portions, but the giver gets portions too, a lot of the meat. In any case, the rule was these shlamim could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So a day, a night, and the next day, and after it was sacrificed. But after that, it's no longer called meat. It's not considered to be meat. You're supposed to get rid of it, actually. You're not supposed to eat the shlamim after the second day. So they're saying if it was salted for longer, then you can eat it on Tisha B'Av. What I didn't know, let's see if he's got I don't think he really gave a good answer here, because my question is, at least from our practice today, we salt, any kosher meat you eat has to be salted for 3 days to drain off all the blood. So normal meat would be salted for 3 days. Who would eat the meat? And they would roast the meat, of course. So that's another way. If you don't salt your meat, you can broil it for a certain amount of time, it kind of to well done status, and then it's kosher. But usually people salt. I mean, today any kosher meat you buy is going to be salted already by the butcher. But it says as long as it is like peace offering, as long as it is not like the peace offering. There's no practical difference between these two readings. No, that's what he. Yeah, okay. I don't know how to answer that question about how that relates to what we do with meat today. Okay, what about yain from the press? Kol zman shehu toses. Yeah.
Minute. One way of preserving meat is to salt it.
Right. So I'm a little bit.
So if you don't do anything to it, you probably don't want to eat it after 2 days.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I'm just a little confused by he says.
It's basically jerky at that point.
He says, yeah. See, it says after this time has passed, it's no longer called meat. So I'm a little confused. I don't know what exactly, because in that case, really all meat would be okay. So I don't know what this halakha is really teaching us. I don't know enough about that.
Unless it's the way it's prepared, it's if they dehydrated it as well and it became more like jerky.
Yeah,
that might its ability to be sustainable is what they're considering not meat. Like a radish.
Yeah. So that was a little confusing to me. Yain migito ad kama. So what? Kol zman shehu toses. If it is as long as it is fermenting, toses is like boiling up. And Tana yain toses ein bo mishum gilui. Wine that is fermenting does not have a problem with regard to exposed liquids. That's in Mishnaic times, exposed liquids were really a concern. I don't know how dangerous it was that a snake would get in there. That you see, that's his explanation, and that's the traditional explanation: is that if you keep liquids overnight that are uncovered, the fear is that a snake with its poison will get in and poison the drink. I don't know if that's. I mean, I can understand in general that you didn't want to you didn't want to expose your liquids because you didn't know what was going to fly in there, climb in. But it's usually the explanation is given as a snake with its venom. But when it's fermenting, when it's in this process of boiling up, you don't worry. The snake's not going to go in there, so it's okay if you don't have the barrel at this point covered. How long is the fermenting period? So it's 3 days from the time the grapes were pressed. So this would basically be, grapes that you're just starting to ferment, but they haven't completed. 3 days would be enough for it to ferment and turn it into wine.
I would want to drink something that was only fermented for 3 days.
Yeah, yeah. All right, then we could, okay. And then Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kachaya min hago shel Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli. This was the custom of Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Eli, on the eve of the 9th of Av, Erev Tisha B'Av, Mivi'in lo pat chareva b'melech b'yoshev. He would eat, and here we get the sense of what how you're really supposed to be eating in this state of mind. He would have a piece of stale bread with salt, and he would sit bein tanur l'kiraim, between the oven and the stove, which is considered the dirtiest part because they're very dirty in that area, and he would eat it. V'shoteh aleha kiton shel mayim. He would drink a little bit of water. V'domeh kemi shemeto mutal lefanav, and he would be like somebody whose dead is right before him before they bury the deceased. So that's kind of the idea here with all this discussion of food is, it's very different from even though Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur are the only two 24-hour fasts, very different attitude during the fast. Yom Kippur, we're eating a full meal, and some of the commentaries say that we're supposed to be in a joyful mood because we're confident that God's gonna redeem us from all of our wrongs. Tisha B'Av, we're in a mood of grief. We're grieving because we know what's coming. The destruction is coming. And so therefore we eat very little because we just can't stomach anymore. Tanan hatam makom shenahagula sot malacha b'Tisha B'Av osim. So here we get into the issue of what can you work on Tisha B'Av, because it's not a festival like Sukkot or Pesach or anything like that. It's not Shabbat. Can you work? And it says, places where people were accustomed to work on Tisha B'Av, you could do it. And a makom shenahagusha lo la'asot einosim. But if you're in a community that said, no, we don't work on Tisha B'Av, then you don't go to work. But in any case, sages should refrain from working. They're at a different standard, and they have to model certain types of behavior. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Le'olam ya'aseh kol adam atzmo ketalmid chacham. But here, in this particular case, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was kind of an elitist, said, no, actually, in this case, everybody should see themselves as a talmid chacham. Don't work. Tanya nami chachi, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Okay, so we have another baraita. Le'olam ya'aseh adam atzmo ketalmid chacham kedei sheyitaneh. That a person should see themselves on this day as a Talmid Chacham, and that's status because you want to afflict yourself. And the Talmidei Chachamim are doing that, and we should all follow their example. Tanya Idach. Okay, another braita. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel again. Omer. Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh b'Tisha B'Av ki'ilu ochel v'shoteh b'Yom Kippurim. You eat, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, you eat on Tisha B'Av, it's as if you're eating on Yom Kippur, and we know that is, guilty of being cut off from the people. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kol ha'oseh malacha b'Tisha B'Av, einoro es siman bracha le'olam. Rabbi Akiva says, everybody who works on Tisha B'Av, they will not see any sign of blessing in their efforts. Or in this case, never see a sign of blessing from the particular work that you're doing. So I don't know, I guess if you went out and started planting seeds on Tisha B'Av, they're not going to grow properly. That's what he's saying. V'chamim omrim, and the sages say, Kol ha'oseh malacha b'Tisha B'Av ve'eino mitabel al Yerushalayim eino ro'eh b'simchata. There's a quid pro quo here. If you, the sages taught that if a person does not mourn for Jerusalem on Tisha B'Av, and they go and do work as if it's a normal day, then you know what? You didn't mourn for the day. You're not going to see the joy when it comes back. Shene'emar simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu va kol ohaveha. Rejoice with Jerusalem, be glad with her, all who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all who mourn for her. So if you mourn, then when the good times come, you'll be able to celebrate with a joyful heart. Mikan amru, from here they taught, kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zoche v'ro'eh b'simchata. Anybody who mourns over Jerusalem will merit to see her joy, or will see her in joy. V'she'eino mitabel al Yerushalayim eino ro'eh b'simchata. And if one who does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see her future joy. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's also a Baraita which states something similar. Kol ha'ochel basar v'shoteh yayin b'tisha b'av. Anybody who eats meat and drinks wine on Tisha B'av, alav hakatuv omer v'tehi avonotam al atzmotam. Though iniquities shall be upon their bones. So stay away from eating meat and drinking wine on Tisha B'av. Okay. Next one. Oh, here's another interesting thing, another interesting custom, which I don't think we observe anymore. But Rabbi Yehuda mechayev b'kfidat hamita v'lo hodu lo chachamim. So Rabbi Yehuda said another practice on Tisha B'av is you turn over the bed. You turn over your beds, and you don't. But the chachamim didn't agree with them. And as I wrote in the notes, I didn't really know what that means. I don't know like what their beds were made out of, and he doesn't give us any explanation. So I don't know what that means to turn over the bed. I mean, in the world that we live in, some people have some people's mattresses. It doesn't make, first of all, it wouldn't make a difference if you turn it over. And some people, it would definitely make it, you can't really sleep on the other side. So I don't know what their beds were like. And so Tanya Amrulo Rabbi Yehuda. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, Lidvarech, according to your words, Ubarotu menikot ma tehei. What about pregnant women or nursing women? What are they supposed to do? And he said to them, Afani lo amarti ela biyachol. So he says, I'm only talking about people who can deal with it. I guess, well, in any case, it's pretty obvious that if you turn your bed over, it means it's more uncomfortable to sleep. And he says, I'm talking about people who can deal with it. Tanya Nami Hachi, Modeh Rabbi Yehuda lachamim. In this case, there was a Baraita that said he acknowledged or he conceded to the Chachamim b'she'eino yachol. In the case of people who are not able to sleep. Now he says on the floor. So I don't know if overturning your bed means you take your bed away. It's a little confusing here. But in any case, it's obviously, the point is, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. When the notion of turning over the bed, whether it means removing the bed or just turning it over to a more uncomfortable side, that's only for those people who can handle it. Umodim chachamim l'Rabbi Yehuda b'yachol. I mean, who can't handle it, I'm sorry. In the case of Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the chachamim if a pregnant woman or a person who, for whatever reason, couldn't sleep on this overturned bed, they don't have to. But the rabbis conceded to Rabbi Yehuda that a person who could deal with it should. And what's the difference between the two views? Ika banayhu sha'ar mitot. What do you do? So the difference between the two, the practical difference between these two opinions is that, what about the other beds in the house? Rabbis seem to follow that it's only the bed that you're sleeping on, whereas Rabbi Yehuda would be arguing all the beds in the house should be turned over. Kedetanya, כשאמרו לכפות המיטה, לא מיטתו בלבד הוא כופה, אלא כל המיטות כולן. All the beds should be overturned whenever you're supposed to overturn a bed in your house for whatever reason. Amar Rava, Hilchata Kitana Didan. He says the halacha is in accordance with the Tana of our Mishnah, V'lo hodu lo chachamim called Ikar, that the majority opinion did not concede to Rabbi Yehud at all, and therefore you don't need to overturn your bed on Tisha B'Av. And now we're getting to the end here. This is which is a much more um, happy. I mean, it ends on a more upbeat note. Amar Rabban Gamliel ben Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael kechamisha asar be'av uchayom haKippurim. There were no other more joyous days in the calendar of Israel as the 15th of Av, right after Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th, so 6 days later, and Yom Kippur. Okay, so what are these days so joyful? Well, Bishlama Yom Kippurim, Mishum di'it be slicha u'mechila Yom shenitnu bo luchot ha'achronot. That in the case of Yom Kippur, we understand it is a joyful day, even though, of course, we're all in trepidation and we're fasting and we're worried about our future, but we're confident because the day itself of Yom Kippur brings pardon and forgiveness. And at the same level of joyfulness or reconciliation, we would call it, as when the second pair of tablets were brought down by Moses after of course, Tisha B'Av, which represents the destruction of the tablets. Or wait, was it Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was the destruction of the tablets, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. Ela Chamisha Asar B'Av Maihi. What about the 15th of Av? What's so special about that? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Yom Shehutru Shvatim Levo Zeh B'Zeh. So the first explanation is this was the day on which the different tribes were permitted to marry with other tribes people. Obviously, there was a belief that originally the tribes stayed separate and married only within their own. That's certainly the case of what we read with the daughters of Zelophehad, who were complaining that because they had no brothers, their father's portion would be lost to other peoples, other tribes or other men. And so the Torah allows for women, if there's no sons, daughters can inherit their father's portion. Later on, that was modified because the tribe of was it Naphtali? What Zelophehad is in what tribe? Was it God? Well, okay, whatever tribe they were in, they were the rest of the tribe was like, wait a minute, if these women marry out, if they marry somebody in another tribe, they'll be able to take that portion. We'll lose our portion. So they modified it and say, okay, the women get to inherit, but they got to marry somebody in the same tribe. But so now, according to this Tu B'Av, oh, you know what? Everybody can marry anybody.
I have never taken the story of the daughters to restrict the behavior of men.
Yeah, right. So at first it was to restrict the behavior.
Marry a woman from another tribe.
Right, but
question of inheritance there.
Exactly. So the problem was that their tribe though was worried about losing the tribal land.
But here it seems to broaden the.
Yes, right. Here they're saying, yeah, and which makes sense, of course, because by the time of Shmuel, who knew what tribe they were from? You know, so that for them it was very easy to say, yeah, there came a time when everybody got when we stopped distinguishing what tribe you belong to. You could marry anybody. So that was the specialness of the day. Now then it goes on to here's the rest of the portion here. My darush. What was how did they expound, or what verse did they expound? Zeh davar asher tziva Adonai livnot Zelophehad. This was the matter of the Lord concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. That is, let them marry whom they think best, but only within the tribe. Davar zeh lo yehei noheg ela b'dor zeh. Oh, I see what they're saying. Zeh hadavar asher, this matter, this time, the davar zeh. So only in that generation, so that first generation of conquering the land, they had to stick within the tribes. But once the tribes were settled, they were permitted to marry the tribes couldn't intermarry with each other. And that was a day of rejoicing, according to the sages. Now, another explanation, Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Nachman, Yom shehutar shevet binyamin lavo bakahal. Shene'amar ve'ish Yisrael nishba b'mitzpah lemor ish mimenu lo yitain bito levinyamin lisha. This refers to a passage in chapter, I guess it was 20, well, probably chapter 20 in Judges, where basically there was a civil war between the tribes, and the tribe of Benjamin was almost completely wiped out. And so therefore they had a real problem. How were they supposed to save this tribe? There were very few people left, and the other tribes swore that they were never going to mix and match with the Benjaminites. And according to Rav Yosef, in the name of Rav Nachman, the day we're rejoicing Tu B'Av is the day that they got rid of this oath, so that everybody could, they welcomed the tribe of Benjamin back in. And again, what's the my darush? How did they apply the verse? How did they understand that verse? Ish mimenu lo yitain bito levinyamin isha. It said mimenu, no one from among us will marry into the tribe of Benjamin, but later generations were okay. So that's another possibility. It was a day on which the Benjaminites were welcomed back into the family of Israel. Here's another explanation. What's so great about Tu B'Av? Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Yom shekalu bo metei midbar. This was the day. Remember when they blew it with the spies, and God says, "Okay, none of the adults are getting into the land of Israel." Then 40 years later, all of those people had died off, and so the Tu B'Av was the day on which the last adults of the slave generation died, and they were ready to move on. The Amar Mar Ad shelo kalu metei midbar lo haya dibur im Moshe. God refused to speak to Moses all of those years that there were still people from that generation alive. Shene'emar vayihi ka'asher tamu kol anshe ha'milchama lamut. When came to pass when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people, Vayidaber Elai. That's when God spoke to me. This is we just read this a couple weeks ago. Elai haya hadibur. To me came God's word, but as long as they were all alive, God wasn't talking to me. It must have been very hard because I don't know if they knew where they were going. Okay, so that's another explanation. So this was a day when the death stopped from that community. And here's another explanation of Tu B'Av. Ula Amar, Yom Shabitel Hoshea ben Ela, Prosdiot Shehoshiv Yerovam ben Nevat al Drachim, Shalo Ya'alu Yisrael L'Regel. There was a time when the tribes split and the northern tribes picked their own king, Yerovam, and the larger tribe of Judah was in the south. Obviously, the temple, which was still important for even the northern tribes, was in the tribe of Judah. So on festivals, people would have to come from the north, and they would bring their offerings, which of course enriched the south. And Yeroboam was furious about this because he was losing revenue. So he placed guards on the road so that the Jews up north were not allowed to travel down to the south to make their festivals. And then he built some temples up in his part of the country where he encouraged people to go. So according to Ula, Tu B'Av was a day of celebration because the following king, later king Hoshea, and the kings in the north were always killing each other off. So there's a lot of assassinations. But King Hoshea canceled the guards that Yerovam had placed. And that was joyful because now everybody could go up to Jerusalem, wherever they lived, whichever, whether you were in Israel or you were in Judea, you could go celebrate at the temple. and V'yamar, la'eza shirtzu v'yalu, that they may descend to wherever they wish. So he let them go. See that she opened it up to Bethel or Dan. Those were the two places in the north. And if you've ever been to Israel, and there's a park up in the north, and they've uncovered what they believe to be was the makeshift. I wouldn't call it a temple really, but because it's very small, but it's like the makeshift cultic altar and building that may have housed the northern kingdoms where they wanted people to go to make sacrifices.
Where's
Yeah.
the,
Where is it?
No.
It's up north. It's in a place called Dan,
okay,
and it's a national park, and they have it ringed off. It's very interesting. I mean, but it's really tiny, and we think of it as this major. The temple was a major building. It wasn't under Herod, but it's very possible that at the time of King David, King Solomon, it wasn't such a big, impressive looking place. And this place isn't that impressive either. Another explanation, Tu B'Av. What's the celebration of Tu B'Av? Yom Shenitna Charugei Beitar Likvura. Beitar was the last revolt that the Jews had against the Romans. It was in 135, so it was quite a few generations after the destruction of the temple. And this time it was a much more organized revolt. Bar Kokhba was the leader, and even Rabbi Akiva is known to have said that he was the Messiah, and they fought valiantly, but of course the Romans just wiped them out. And this time the Romans were like, we're done with you. And we read this last week, that this was after Beitar, they not only the temple had already been destroyed, but they plowed it over so that there wasn't a chance to rebuild it. And they made Jerusalem persona non grata for Jews. They changed the name, Aelia Capitolina. Anyway, they wouldn't let the dead of Beitar be buried. Beitar was the last battle where Romans finally wiped out the Israel forces, and the dead were not allowed to be buried as punishment. But according to the Midrash, the Agadah, that a miracle occurred, and for the several years that they weren't allowed to bury these fighters, the bodies did not decompose. And so finally on Tu B'Av, according to this Midrash, they were brought to burial. And they instituted a blessing, Hatov HaMeitiv, and because they were grateful that the bodies did not decompose while they were waiting for burial, and they were grateful to God that they were allowed to bring them to burial. And that is also the origin of the fourth blessing of Birkat Hamazon. So that fourth blessing, which is very different from the first three, is understood to have been created at this moment as a celebration for being able to bury these fighters appropriately. And then, we have one more before we get to the main reason we put, the custom that we usually follow about what Tu B'Av is about. Rav Yosef de Amri Tarvaihu Yom Shepasku Melichrot Eitzim Lema'aracha. This was the day on which they stopped chopping down trees for the arrangement of wood on the altar. As it says in a Braita, Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, from the 15th of Av onward, the strength of the sun grows weaker, right? The days get shorter. And from this day, and it's a little cooler, they would not cut any additional wood for the arrangement, as they would not be properly dry. So it wouldn't be hot enough to dry the wood, and it wouldn't be fit. According to the notes you had here, they would be too wet, and that's when bugs can get in there, and it wouldn't be appropriate to use in the temple. And then I love the Rav Menashe explanation. V'karule Yom Tevar Magal. It's the day of breaking of the scythe, or the scythe, the day of the breaking of the axe, right? that because no more trees were cut down, and the trees were really happy. So it was a happy day for the trees. And the Gemara adds, from the 15th of Av onward, when the days begin to shorten, one adds to his nightly Torah study. One who does this will add years to their life, and he who does not add will be gathered in. What is the meaning of the phrase "he will be gathered"? It means that his mother will bury him, as he will be gathered to his grave. All right. So the idea here is that Tu B'Av is a great day for the trees. They don't have to worry. They don't get nervous anymore about getting cut down. And also, it's the day when we get to study Torah at night, because the nights are cooler and the nights are longer, right? I mean, if it was South Bend, Indiana, you waited. If you're a worker, you're a field worker, and you're working all day. Well, it doesn't get dark until about 9:30. It's a little hard to start studying at 9:30 at night. But when it gets dark at 6 o'clock, okay, so I have the evening to study. So that's another reason to rejoice. But here's the most common explanation for
some sort of wordplay in the Hebrew. Where was it?
Mosif Yasef.
Yeah, Mosif Yasif. That's got to be some sort of.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And Mikan ve'elach the Mosif Yosif u'de lo Mosif Ye'asef. So right, they're two similar words. Ye'asef, the shoresh is Aleph Samech Fei.
Yeah.
Yosif is Yud Samech Fei, but they sound a lot. So so it's a play on words that if you don't add, you're going to basically subtract. If you don't add, you're going to be gathered in, meaning you'll lose, your life will be shortened. So you either add years to your life or you get it shortened by gathering in early. So it's just a reminder that there's always time for Torah study. All right, here's the more common explanation for this celebratory day. And this was in the Mishnah. Shebehen benot Yerushalayim. This was the day on which the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes, and on the 15th of Av, they would go out to the vineyards and dance. The sages taught this tradition in great. So that's from the Mishnah. So the Mishnah talks about that this was the day that the daughters would go out, and they would all borrow clothes from each other. That was the other key thing. They borrowed clothes from one another so that nobody should feel like if they didn't have something nice, well, everybody's borrowing from each other, and nobody nobody is can be haughtier than the next. But notice how the sages add to it in greater detail, and by doing so, they keep this this case system alive, right? Who borrows from who? The daughter of the king borrows from the daughter of the high priest. The daughter of the high priest borrows from the daughter of the deputy high priest. The daughter of the deputy high priest borrows from the daughter of the priest anointed for war. The daughter of the priest anointed for war borrows from the daughter of a common priest, and all the other Jews borrow from each other. So it kind of undercuts the beauty of the original Mishnah, which is everyone borrows from each other. But here it's like, well, the king isn't going to borrow from some lay person. She's going to borrow from the next lower rung. So it is interesting to say, well, yeah, but she's borrowing from somebody below her status, but still it's a pretty high status. It's not somebody, just a commoner, So I thought that, and the answer is, why did they all borrow garments? Because they did not embarrass one who did not have her own white garments, which is very lovely. But I did think that it's unfortunate. I thought that the sages, in their explanation, kind of took away a little bit of the beauty of the Mishnah. And then, of course, they would want to let us know that all the garments had to be washed. They had to be immersed in a mikvah because somebody might be ritual impure. Obviously, this was important for the sages because they know that they take, or at least in their understanding, their class took ritual impurity very seriously, but the common Jew necessarily did not. And so I'm sure the question was, wait a minute, if we're all borrowing from each other, all the common Jews are borrowing from each other, what if a Jew who doesn't follow the laws of ritual purity and impurity, how is my daughter supposed to borrow from that guy? Oh, okay. Well, everybody went to the mikvah and they all washed their clothes, so it would be all okay for everybody. Okay. And then we get to the end here. Benot Yisrael yotzot v'cholot b'kramid. The daughters of the Jewish people would go out and dance in the vineyards, and a Tana taught, Mi she'ein lo isha nifneh l'sham. This is where you would go to find a wife. If you were a single person, you go because they're all out there. Because, remember, this is a society in which women are not usually out there in the public square. And to see women dance is very exciting, in a closed society like this. And so if you were looking for a wife and you didn't really have that many opportunities, this would be the place to go. This would be the time to go and meet someone. And then I love this conclusion. So there are different types of people, right? So miyuchasot shebehen hayu omrot bachur, young man, lift up your eyes and see what you choose for a wife. So this is miyuchasot. This is from the word yiches, right? The women who had yiches, prominent lineage, they would say, hey, when you're choosing a wife, you should check out somebody who comes from a prominent family. Tanu Rabbanan Yefefiyot Shebehen Mehayu Omrot. What would they say? Tanu Anechem Liyofi. Allow your eyes to look at beauty. She'eni Sha Ela Liyofi. Because a wife should be beautiful. Well, that's her that's her skill set. Miuchasot Shebehen Mahayu Omrot. Tanu Anechem Lemishpacha. Look at the family. You don't want beauty is not important. It's the family. It's the connections. It's the links. It's the status. The fisha ain haisha el levanin. Because what's the point? You want kids who are going to have status, right? Or maybe in this case, well, miyuchasod means distinguished lineage, right? And it says here that they'll inherit her lineage. Okay, and unfortunately, the term here, but they're trying to distinguish between the one who's the Yefefiyah, the Michuarot Shebehen Mehayu Omrot. What would the, here he says ugly ones. Literally, Michuar is ugly, but maybe we'd say the homely ones, the ones who weren't standout beauties. They would say, Kechu mikachachem l'shum shamayim, uvilvad sheta'atrunu b'zihufim. That when you marry, you should do so for the sake of heaven, right? It's not for beauty, it's not for lineage, but it's for the sake of creating a family, right? That's what's most important. L'shem shamayim, you're doing it for the sake of heaven, for the sake of just the sake of marriage alone. And by the way, and also if you were to adorn us, provide us with gold jewelry, you know what? We'll look a hell of a lot better. And the note on the side comments that, of course, all the daughters of Israel are pretty. All Jewish girls are beautiful, but it's the poverty that makes them ugly. So it's not that they're homely. It's that they, these Jewish women that they're talking about, the Michuarot, are come from poor families. And you know what? If you're able to give us the proper jewelry and the proper clothes, we'll look as beautiful as anybody else.
I was struck
Yeah.
in this by the language. Now it's in translation. I don't know if it really reads quite the same way in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
But acquire your purchase for the sake of heaven.
Right. That's the literal language for marriage. Kicha, which is the same term for purchasing, is the same term used in Hebrew in Bible for marriage, for acquiring marriage. So he's taking it very literally here as, purchase your purchase, acquire your purchase. But I think that we would translate it maybe more idiomatically as, get married for the sake of heaven. But yes, literally, marriage language was in the terms of acquisition, because that's what it was. Look, it was as much an economic
I thought marriages also tended to be deals between families.
Right, right. No, there was a mohar, a dowry.
The
that was
individual
given.
here, the individuals were not so much consulted
Right,
in the matter of economic relations between
right,
families.
right. I mean, for us today, it's like, oh my God, that's so insulting. But in that world, it wasn't so. And therefore, I think, it's appropriate to, I think, for us to maybe acknowledge that that form of language and then change it when appropriate. But he's translated absolutely literally here. And then the last piece, and this is the closing paragraph, is the tractate concludes with a statement related to the topic of dancing. I think it's very interesting how they change the topic here. It says, Amar Ula Bira'a Amar Rabbi Elazar. So Ula from the city of Bira'a said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, in the future, Hakadosh Baruch Hu la'asot machol latzadikim. He's going to make a dance pot. He's going to celebrate in dance with the righteous. V'hu yoshev b'neihem b'gan Eden, and he's good. This is in Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, right? Heaven, another stand-in for heaven. And God is going to be in the center of the circle. And we've all seen, been in weddings where there's circle dances, and God's going to be in the center. And everyone will point to God, all the righteous. Amar ve'amar bayomahu, hine Eloheinu zeh, kivinu lo v'yoshienu, zeh Adonai kivinu lo nagila v'nismecha b'yushuato. And behold, this is our God, for whom we waited, that God might save us. This is the Lord for whom we waited. We will be glad and rejoice in God's salvation. And so Steinsaltz concludes, God will be revealed so that every righteous individual will be able to say, this is our God, as though they were pointing at God with a finger. And that's the end. Hadran alach b'shlosha prakim uslika la masechet Tanit. And thus we've concluded. Mazel tov, yasher koach to all of you. Let's stop the share so I can see people. Okay, so mazel tov to that. We finished the Ta'anit, and in a minute I'm gonna, let's see, did I do this? We're gonna say the Hadran, which actually you're supposed to say with a minion, but we're gonna modify since just those of us here. I don't know if you want to make have any comments, any sections of before we, have a little, I don't know if you've got it home for celebratory food. I have Wisconsin Kringle here with me and a little bit of wine. But any comments you want to make about this, about Tanit and what or a section that you felt was most important? Or that was most memorable?
I'm not sure if it's most important, but I was very much taken with stories about Honi the circle maker.
Yeah.
And he seemed to me to be the perfect small child.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold my breath and
right. It's he's a great character, and this is where most of the stories about Honi take place.
I'm sure that there's appreciation of stories about him.
Yeah.
Enough of a character that just
sure.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Nate, did you say something? You had something?
I think as a overall theme, all the fables and a lot of the lessons involve a lot of personal responsibility, which, considering particularly in the first couple chapters about handling crises and community, are very important. About it takes everybody, no matter what position you have, that sort of thing. As far as a memorable part, with Camp Ideal ending, having our own situations with it, the rules for how to deal with predatory animals around the community. I had said it before. obviously it's not bears in Israel or Babylonia, but at scout camp, the policies are the exact same. If they're off more in the forests or in the wilderness, you leave them alone because that's really their house. We're just going to stay away. If they're a little bit close, well, then we'll just evacuate that part, but still sort of allow them to go about their business, and eventually they'll go away, that sort of thing. And then if they're like sitting in the middle of the public square, well, okay, now we'll maybe shoo them away, or that. Camp Ideal had similar things, not so much with bears, but we had birds of prey issues.
Really?
Yeah, there's if you look at the Federation pictures, like on their social media, there's a fox that lives on the Federation grounds, and they get I think Alan gets a lot of really awesome pictures. But also here in Indiana at St. Pat's Park, there's an eagle sanctuary. And I don't think they're flying that far, but we do get hawks and some falcons around, and rabbits are rather frequently, their remains are found on the Federation sometimes.
Boy.
And then on Monday, we found a cat collar. I tried calling the phone number on it to let them know what had happened, but it had been disconnected. Stuff like that. So, but that sort of thing, that's very memorable for me.
Interesting. All right. Very good. Ezekiel, first of all, how you guys feeling? Are you feeling better?
A little better,
Oh, good.
but we still feel a little sick.
Okay. Any part of the Tanit that stood out for you?
I was talking with Alejandro, and I was telling him about the phrase in the page when where talk about Honi Hameagel.
Yeah.
At the end of the story, that he supposed to be, he didn't understand why the bear says that the slavery in Babylon was like a dream. And at the end of the story, it says, or Habruta or Mituta.
Yeah.
And we were investigating what the sages say about that phrase, and that's so important because we need to have somebody who in some way correct our thoughts or something like that, and I sent to print that phrase in a shirt.
That's great.
Because but also in the page of today, in the page 181 on the top of the page, talks about Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right? That Rabbi Yehuda was.
I don't think that was I don't think it's Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, but there's another Rabbi Yehuda, an earlier one.
Okay. I thought he was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, because I was reading in the book of Ma'amar Hazal, the Rambam son, and he was saying that why the other rabbis call Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi Rabbeinu Hakadosh, and he said that in the tractate Pesachim, page 94b, that he was talking with the wise men of the nations, something, I don't know if you can read it, that he accepted that he was wrong, and the wisdom of the nation, the wise men of the nation were correct than him. Yeah,
very right. So a sign of his humility. Yeah.
And that's why I thought that he was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi.
Well, but I think you're right that was definitely a theme of what we saw in Tanit, especially that third chapter where humility is really important. I just wanted to kind of do a little review, looking through the whole tractate. You know, we opened the first chapter was we distinguished between God's power to bring rain. We started with that distinction. God's power to bring rain versus the request to bring rain. That in one part of the Amidah, in the second paragraph, we comment on God's power, and then in the ninth blessing, that's where we ask God for rain. And there was a distinction between the two, and in doing so, we acknowledge our dependence on God, but also and our neediness, but also that we have the confidence to intercede and to go before the universal source of power and make petition. So that despite our limited and our finiteness, our limited nature and our finiteness, we human beings do have agency. We can do something to make when things are bad, even if we don't have control of the universe. And then the second chapter explored what that agency looks like. And we talked more about the rituals, the days of fasting, and how you increase the number of days of fasting, and how if the drought gets more severe, how the behaviors get more severe. And then we got into chapter 3, and it offered us examples of and the other important part of chapter 2 was that there were communal obligations. So we're talking about, you guys have mentioned community, the importance of community. Chapter 2 was about how the community responds to when things are difficult. Chapter 3 then offered us examples of when those acts and rituals worked. We had examples of, certain individuals who were able to bring rain by their actions. Choni Magal, for example, and the others, Rabbi Akiva. And that chapter is known as the chapter of the pious because of the examples of righteous people whose prayers were answered. But we also saw examples of how people considered to be pious, some of these rabbis, failed in their job, and that success and failure appeared to depend on the quality of humility, and it would fail in the expression of arrogance. So humility was really important to righteousness. And then in the last chapter that we just looked at, it discusses other fasts that were part of the normative daily functioning of the temple cult. That there were days when people would fast that had nothing to do with, a drought or a sad day, but rather this is just normal functioning. And the key was that although the priests and the Levites had clear roles in functioning in the temple, at least a representative faction of the people were involved as well. And then we moved into standard fast days, 9th of Av, 17th of Tammuz. And the conclusion that we just finished with today, it was upbeat, right? Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av, these are both days of reconciliation. Yom Kippur of God in Israel, Tu B'Av, we're talking about marriages and people being reconciled. All the different examples, or most of the examples that we had of why we're celebrating on Tu B'Av have to do with marriage. And the closing image is that God and the righteous in heaven are doing this wedding dance. So I thought it was interesting that this tractate began with separation and tension, as with when we don't have rain and we're very anxious. And the sages saw that as a response. The reason why rain doesn't come is because God is dissatisfied with people's behavior or is punishing the people for their behavior. But the tractate closed with unification and reconciliation and celebration. And in the middle, we're given an indication of how do you facilitate reconciliation? Well, it's humility and respect for human dignity. So I thought that it really held together the entire tractate as a literary piece of moving from separation from God and one another to reconciliation. And that's why it concludes with Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is that day that is about reconciliation. So Yasher Koach to everybody. You guys made it through the whole, whatever, it almost took us a year. I'm already thinking about the next tractate, which is, fortunately, if you've got either the book or the text, the PDF comes right afterwards, is Megillah. so we can prepare ourselves for Purim. So won't do that for a while. I got to get through the holidays first. But after the holidays, we will, I hope to see you guys and some more people start up with another tractate.
That would be great. For today's, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and Alejandro, Rifuash Leimara Alejandro, feel better. Okay.
Thank you.
For today's last page, having it where they couldn't decide whether or not learning something new was difficult or easy or fun. In either case, students aren't allowed to study, and presumably everything is new to a student. So I think ultimately, whether they'll admit it or not, learning something new and difficult is always going to be enjoyable.
Very nice, very nice. Oh, so let's do one last thing together. So this is the Hadran. I just got to find it here. This is the liturgy that's recited at the end of studying a Talmudic tractate. It's a little long, but I'll read the Hebrew and we can go through, and you can read the English translations. I'm going through it. Hadran alach masechet ta'anit v'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach masechet ta'anit v'da'atach alan. Lo nitneshe minach masechet ta'anit v'lo titneshe minan la be'alma hadein v'lo be'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu shetehei toratecha emunatenu ba'olam hazeh utehei imanu le'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. These are 10 sons of scholars who, again, were like their father was a scholar. They continued to study Torah, and the lineage of Torah study continued. Ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fihiot amcha Beit Yisrael v'nihiyeh kulanu anachnu v'tze'etze'enu v'tze'etze'ei amcha Beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratcha me'oivai tichachmeni mitzvotecha ki le'olam hili yihi libi tamim b'chukecha leman lo evosh. Leolam lo eshkach pikudecha, kivam hayatani baruch ata Adonai, lamdeni chukecha, amen, amen, sela va'ed. Modim anachnu lach, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohotenu, shesamta chalkenu miyoshvei beit hamidrash, v'lo samta chalkenu miyoshvei kranot. She'anu mashkimim v'heim mashkimim. Anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah v'heim mashkimim l'dvarim b'telim. Anu amelim v'heim amelim. Anu amelim u'mikablim sechar v'heim amelim v'einam mikablim sechar. Anu ratzim v'heim ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chayel l'maba v'heim ratzim l've'er shachat. She'ne'amar ve'ata Elohim toridem l've'er shachat anshe damim u'mirmal lo yechetzu yemehem va'ani evtach bach. This one's a little tough, this paragraph. It's kind of like we're so grateful we're Jewish, but ha for those people who aren't, who don't study Torah like us. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Elohai, kishem she'azartani l'sayim masechet ta'anit, kein ta'azreni lahatchil masechtot u'sfarim acherim l'sayimim. L'lmod u'l'lamed, l'shmor, la'asod, l'kayim, et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha b'yahava. U'zchut kol ha'tanaim ve'amoraim ve'talmidei chachamim ya'amod li u'zari shelo tamush ha'torah mipi u'mipi zar'i al olam v'yitkayem bi v'hidhalechecha tanche otach v'shachbecha tishmor alecha v'hakitzota hi tesichecha ki yirbu yamecha v'yosifu lecha shnot chayim Orechemim b'mimna u'bismola osher v'chavod Adonai oz le'amo yitein Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. You see that even though we're grateful that God gave us the ability to finish this tractate, but we don't stop there. We look forward to the next one. And then well, we don't have a minyan, so we won't say the Kaddish. But then it's traditional to say the rabbinic Kaddish after this amount of Torah study. And it's a very specific Kaddish. It's not like the Kaddish Shalem. It concludes, it has this paragraph in here. It starts the same, but then it says, to give life to the dead and raise them to eternal life, to build the city of Yerushalayim and complete the Beit HaMikdash in its midst, to uproot idol worship from the land, return the service of the heaven to its place, and the Holy One, blessed be he, shall rule in his majesty and splendor in our lives and in the lifetime of the entire household of Israel, swiftly and in the near future. So this special Kaddish talks about the world to come, which of course relates to Torah. So, okay, that's the Hadran, so that's recited. And now, cheers. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu haolam, borei pri hagafen. And yeah, so I hope that we'll start with Megillah. Megillah should be a lot of fun. I don't know if I may want to do just some of the chapters because I don't know if we'll finish before Purim. And I'd love to finish around Purim. And some of the chapters of Megillah are wonderful descriptions of the Esther story. Some of the stuff is, halacha and what day you're supposed to celebrate and all that stuff. But some of the chapters are a lot more fun. So maybe we'll look at just some of the chapters. But in any case, very good. All right, well, yashikov to all of you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Have a great day. Have a good drive.
Bye.
Yeah, enjoyed it.